So let's get us started. So this is our first time using WebEx. We'll see how it goes. And during the speak, please mute your speaker because this could cause some trouble for WebEx. So it's my honor and a pleasure to introduce our speaker. Nick Sturgeon currently serves as a director of information security for IU Health and IU School of Medicine. His responsibilities include supporting the IU School of Medicine Cyber Risk Management Program and leading IU Health's security research and red team. Nick has worked in information technology for over 15 years, with 10 years in cybersecurity, 9 years in law enforcement, and 10 years in state government. Nick earned his Bachelor of Science in Management Information Systems from Indiana State in 2003 and a Master of Science in Cyber Forensics from Purdue 2015. Nick has extensive experience in incident response, digital investigations, criminal investigations, digital media recovery, criminal law, data governance, endpoint protection, network and log analysis, vulnerability management, security operations, incident management, project management, as an instructor and service implementation of management security services. Throughout his career, he has supported multiple industries and sectors, including academia, state, local, tribal, territorial, governments, healthcare, information technology, and manufacturing. In addition to his current duties, Nick is a host on 2 podcasts. He's a part-time information security instructor at the UTSA and adjunct professor at the University of Southern Indiana. He also serves as a board member for the Cyber Resilience Institute, Ohio River Valley chapter of the Cloud Security Alliance, and the National Council of Registered IAOS. So with further ado, let's welcome Nick.
Hey, thank you guys for having me on. And I will say I'm glad I'm, I guess, the guinea pig for this new setup, given our current circumstances with COVID-19. And actually, when we talk about what's going on now with COVID-19 and risk management is perfect. This is a really good introduction into why cyber risk management is needed. And with all of the additional constraints on resources and new potential vectors for cyber criminals to utilize the work from home situation or the crisis to benefit themselves, it's really perfect for the discussion on cyber risk management. So I want to thank you guys for allowing me to come in to talk about cyber risk management and why it's important for an overall cybersecurity program. I am going to share my screen here, get the presentation up. Sure. Share. So can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So I originally developed this presentation more for kind of an introductory into what cyber risk management is. A little bit technical, going to cover some of the frameworks and just the background and standards and regulations. So this is really a high level overview of cyber risk management. So, but why does this matter? I mean, bottom line up front, why do organizations, why with all the technologies and everything that's going on in cybersecurity, why do we need a risk management program? And really, bottom line is it's to help prevent businesses shutting their doors, exposing information, whether it's customer data, it's health information, PII, EPHI, all of that stuff. Risk management goes into helping keeping this stuff from happening. And since I'm talking to, an academic group, I mean, it's not just the high end PI or IP, sorry, the intellectual property that companies have. It's research data that is being sought after just as much as anything else. The potentials beyond just the public relations impact or the loss of data or some of the other things that we think about when we think of loss from a cyber incident, but it's also the government regulation and regulators that are coming out with their fines and their penalties for failing to implement cybersecurity within your organization. I mean, all of that are the negative outcomes of failed cyber risk management or a lack of cyber risk management. Talk some case study. Now, this particular case, I'm leaving out the particular city to protect the innocent as well as the guilty. Probably won't take a detective to figure out which city we're talking about, but a very large major U.S. city was hit with SamSam ransomware variant back in 2018. What we have here is just kind of the very high level effects of what happened. Thousands of city employees could not get access to their computers. Agencies, law enforcement, courts could not do their civic duties, the things that they are set up to do to provide services to citizens. People couldn't pay their water bill. Traffic tickets, again, could not be processed. Several years worth of body cam data from the police department was gone. And just think of the on that from a criminal aspect in criminal justice, the evidence that could have put somebody in jail that had committed anywhere from minor traffic infractions all the way up to very serious crimes, that evidence is gone. It cannot be used because of this particular cyber incident. And depending on which number you read and which article that you read on this, it's anywhere from 17 to $18 million worth of damage to this city. That's a lot of money. State governments, city governments, whether large or small, that amount of money does a lot of damage, and that's a big part of a budget. So, in all of the citizens that aren't able to take care of the things that they need to take care of because the city didn't have access to a good portion of its IT systems. Huge impact. And this is something this city is probably still dealing with today. Even the positives out of this incident will be felt for years to come. Now, I had an opportunity last summer to meet one of the individuals and listen to her talk, and she was I can't remember her exact position then. It may have been a CISO row or someone very high within their security department, listening to their response and what they had to do. as a result of this. It was fascinating from an incident response perspective. But the impact is going to be felt for years to come. And here's the thing. It could have most likely been avoided. And in their after action report, what was found, and one of the big things here, as you can see in bold, is there were gaps in their formal risk assessment. Had they taken it seriously, had they put the proper amount of resources and time and attention into doing a risk assessment and doing one right, in my opinion, that incident probably would not have happened. And if it did, it probably would have been minimized in its scale and impact. So I've covered a little bit of the topics of what we're going to get through. So I won't read this verbatim. But as we get into it, let's start from the beginning. I'm going to assume that you guys don't know what cyber risk management is. It's not an insult on anybody's intelligence, but I want to make sure we get on a solid base and that we're all going from this point forward from the same point. So I'm sure most everybody here has heard of NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology. In their special publication 800-30, this is what they define as what risk is. It's the net negative impact of the exercise of a vulnerability, considering both the probability and the impact of the occurrence. Now, there's some really key points in this, and probability and impact. So what is the chance or the likelihood of a bad thing happening? And then what is the impact? And I know from Purdue, when we talk about quantification and wanting hard data to make good decisions, probability is quantifiable. The same thing with impact. That can be dollars. It could be days out of service or whatever it may be, but we can use those 2 points to help quantify our decision making. So some of the elements of risk, we have our threats. These are could be the bad guys that are out there that want to attack our individual organizations. These could be, individual points of malware or anything like that. Again, likelihood, what are the chances of this happening? Very, very important, especially when we talk about prioritization and getting resources for different things and lining those up. So, I mean, why do we want to put a whole lot of expensive resources to something that is very, very unlikely to happen? It just doesn't make sense. The vulnerabilities, again, looking internally to IT systems or our physical layouts, where are our weaknesses? Where are those, where are weak links in our chain? The asset value, again, this kind of goes into impact. Again, why would we put a whole lot of expensive protections around assets that aren't that valuable? Again, or if we have our crown jewels that could mean us staying in business or not, and we're not providing the right amount of resources around those assets, we're just opening ourselves up for a lot of bad stuff to happen. And then the compensating controls, these are the things that, we know bad things are going to happen, but when they do, we have these things to give us buffers, and they're also the way we act and the way we handle when bad things do happen. Now, how do we respond to risk? And it's just not all hair on fire. It's just not panicking. I mean, when we talk about the current situations with the COVID-19 issue, and we see these panic buys, now that's not really how we want to respond to risk. We want to do it smartly. We want to make sure that we have these things in place and how we handle risk. Now, I will mention too that individually, we are constantly evaluating risk, whether you realize it or not. Whether we decide to speed or cross the street when the light is showing us the red hand, those little decisions are us responding to risk. Well, we can avoid it. We can say, you know what, I'm just not going to leave the house. And that's pretty much, keeping it contextual to what's going on today. By us quarantining ourselves at home, we are trying to avoid the risk altogether. Stopping those behaviors or processes that introduce that risk into our lives or our businesses or whatever, we can try to reduce. We're going to take steps and measures that will reduce the opportunity for that risk to happen. Or you can be like some people and be like, yeah, you know what? I think it's a hoax, or I don't think it's going to affect me, and just accept whatever happens. We, in business, for years, as I was getting out into the professional world and even going through grad school, as cyber is really ramping up and the data breaches are more and more, most companies were saying, you know what, bottom line, the cost to implement these security controls or these security applications is so much more than the damage. I'm just going to accept it. Lastly, we can say, you know what, we're going to transfer the risk. And typically that's done through insurance or through our contracts. We're going to say, insurance company, I'm going to pay this premium. And when something bad happens, I'm going to rely on you to cover anything, any of the cost that I incur as a result of that risk happening. Now, I will say, if anybody has any questions, if you want to chime in, please do. I know it's a little bit harder over the WebEx, but if you do have a question, please feel free to chime in, or if you want to wait until after I get through here, that's fine as well. So, and I love NIST. I mean, NIST has been around for years, and the work that they do on cybersecurity related stuff, risk management, is great. One downside is they're very verbose when with their definitions and their documents. And I hate having this particular slide in this presentation, just because it's very wordy. But being the good academic that I am, want to have that in there. But let's break that down a little bit more into really what risk management is. The first step is we have to understand what our business is. Who, what, when, where. We have to know who we are. From there, we then can start identifying the particular things that are unique to my organization or your organization, and what those particular things that could cause us harm. From there, we we do our analysis and analyze what those negative outcomes would be for those given situations. We look at the threats, we look at our potential responses, the actions and decisions that we are going to take based on those particular situations. Then, once we have done all of that, the second part is more of our action. These are the things that we're doing to minimize either the likelihood of that bad thing happening, or we try to minimize the impact of those bad things happening. And either in the minimizing the likelihood or impact, we are doing compensating controls where you're changing our processes, we're putting in safeguards, but all of that together is really the action piece of managing risk, at least again from my point of view. Now, where cyber risk management comes in, all we're really doing is we're overlaying our IT infrastructure, our digital infrastructure onto that. So everything I just said, now just apply it to our technology, our data, our networks, supply chain, all of that stuff. The added thing is we are doing this on a constant basis. It's not a one and done. And I'll get into more of that here in a little bit. But where cyber is not necessarily a unicorn is that this process can be applied to other things. It could be financial risk. It could be all hazards. Coming from a public safety background, this is something that police agencies, fire agencies, we look at an all hazards approach. So in that aspect, and I hate to, and I kind of get some cyber folks a little angry at me at times for saying, hey, we're not a unicorn. We're not that special in the grand scheme of things. Is to be taken seriously, to really get that buy-in at the executive level, we need to realize that we're just one piece within the business, one piece within the organization. On the other hand, it does take folks that have the experience, that know the technologies, that know the threats to be able to run it. But in the context of the business, we need to be able to fit in with the entire organization, the entire enterprise. So why take a risk-based approach? Well, I've mentioned some of this already, is when we quantify, when we do the research and the analysis, and we start looking at this thing through a rigored analytical approach, and we have the data, then we can really say what the true risks are, and thus be able to apply and prioritize what resources, and it's limited. Every organization has a finite amount of resources available to use. And I've seen it. I've been in, number of different agencies, and everybody's project is their baby, and they wanted to get it through, and they want it to be funded and all of that stuff. But when you are competing against every other part of the organization, resources are finite. And so you have to be able to apply those resources to those things that are going to have the highest impact of reducing risk. But even then, going through this risk management process, like I mentioned already, is that we're using proven methods and techniques. We're not just guessing. It isn't a gut feel. It isn't Nick just saying, well, I think, I want to, go with the wind here, put my finger out and say, well, I think this is what we need to be doing. We have data behind our decisions. And that data and the facts are powerful when it comes to talking with executives and those within the C-suite. But two, I use the broken glass kind of methodology. Once you start looking through a risk lens, it really does change the way you think about everything that you do. And once that glass is broken, you can't ever go back. And I apologize. I've background noise. It's the downside of being work from home. But when you are going through this analytical process and you're using the data, you're now giving the C-suite, you're giving management really a power in being able to decide which of those controls are going to be implemented. And that is huge. We're not wasting a bunch of resources needlessly on things that aren't going to work. Again, to offend, I guess, the the cybersecurity crowd here, more of the vendors, and again, not really meaning to offend, but when you've got 50 vendors that are coming at you selling blinky lights and all sorts of cool toys and these things, how do you know it's going to solve the problems that you have? And risk management and going through this process and this program will help you know what to implement a lot better than just this has got some cool blinky light. And this is, so I work with a lot of privacy and compliance driven folks, and this is where I upset them. So I'm an equal opportunity in who I upset. But compliance management, in healthcare, we're heavily regulated. The Office of Civil Rights under the Health and Human Services Agency is our primary regulator, and HIPAA is no joke. I mean, it is hefty. It's very prescriptive in some aspects. The government will come down with the heavy hand if you are found to be in violation of HIPAA. And so what happens in these really heavy regulated industries like healthcare and finance, there's a mentality that tends to happen on checking the box. Well, are we, the regulation says we have to do X, Y, and Z, or A through Z. And you just go through this process of checking the box. And I'm sure this will make a lot of security folks happy. Compliance does not equate to being secure. I am sure that a lot of these companies that have been breached thought they were compliant. And I thought that thought they were doing security the right way. And I'm sorry to say that's not the case. Checking the box does not make you secure. On the other hand, you do have to be cognizant of what regulations that you are mandated under and have to follow. It is a risk. So you can't just completely ignore those regulatory obligations, because if you don't follow them, then you're putting your organization at risk of being in violation of one or more laws. It is one of my philosophies that if you do security right, the compliance will come. The compliance piece will follow. And in this process, you do have to understand what those regulatory burdens are and map them, what you're doing to those regulations. But the compliance piece will come. And that's something you'll hear me say at least 2 or 3 more times through the remainder of this program is when you do security right, the compliance piece will come. So why take this risk-based approach? Well, the biggest thing is, again, you are able to prioritize the biggest things that will cause you the most harm. Whether that's regulation, whether that's a technology risk, whether it's people risk, you're able to prioritize those things. And call it the 80-20 rule. When you do that, you're probably on a, some statistical average taking care of 80% of those things that will cause you the most damage. But it also, I think, another huge important aspect is that you become more proactive. I've been in a number of IT organizations where you're basically just a firefighter. You're moving from one fire to the next fire to the next fire, and it's like a dog chasing its tail. You're never getting caught up. And when you start having these prioritized lists of things to do and knowing and applying those things strategically, you're able to become proactive. And then instead of being a firefighter, you're actually making headway. And I've been there. I've multiple organizations where even when I was a cop doing IT stuff, I felt more like a firefighter than I did a cop. And it's frustrating because you don't feel like you're ever making any headway. So, and I talked about this a little bit a couple of slides ago, but under that risk-based approach, you're only worried about checking the box and focused on the requirements and focused on, well, are we doing this? And it really isn't how well are you doing those things. It's, well, we're doing them. We're compliant with the law. And that check box mentality gets ingrained into the organization. And the other thing, and the thing I think is most troublesome, in my opinion, when we are focused on compliance, is those regulations end up being the ceiling of what organizations think they should be doing. Not the floor, not the minimum, but the ceiling. And so the mindset of organizations are, well, the government says I need to be doing these things. And any more than that, what am I getting out of it? So at that point, it's a financial decision, even maybe whether or not they think they're taking a risk-based decision or not. They don't see the value in going above those standards because the government has now, this is what I've got to do and I don't want to do anything else. It happens, organization in and out. So it's another kind of foot stomp moment on why I think taking a compliance-based approach is the wrong approach. So another important note here, and I hit on it a little bit earlier, is that this cyber risk management program should be incorporated into the enterprise risk management program, because there are other risk to a business outside the cyber risk. And being a cybersecurity professional, I want to think that these cyber risk will cripple and are, you know, absolutely the most important risk that the organization should be addressing. But in real life, there are other risks that are just as damaging to an organization other than cyber risk. But when you're also incorporated into the risk management at the enterprise level, you start talking the same language. One of the downsides, and another kind of points I like to pick on folks in the cybersecurity world, is we tend to want to use our own jargon and talk our own language. And I think that does more detrimental, or does more to detriment our standpoint or our conversations with the C-suite when we just talk the bits and bytes. We need to be able to speak in a language that our, you know, senior leadership or executive leadership folks understand. I like talking bits and bytes more, you know, just as much as every other cyber geek out there. And that's fine to do when you're in that company of other cyber folks. But when you're talking to executives, they speak a whole nother language. And when we can use risk as that kind of Rosetta Stone, and to be able to translate that geek speak into corporate speak. Now we're talking, again, probabilities, we're impacts, we're talking dollars and cents. Those are the type of things that executives understand. As much as we want to, you know, talk about the, you know, the technical details of SAM or other vulnerabilities, or, you know, they don't understand it. They're not ever going to be true cyber folks, and they don't need to be. That's why they have us there. But it's our responsibility as cyber professionals to adapt to the organization and be able to talk in their language. It may not seem fair, but that's just the reality of the world that we live in. Now, I've mentioned regulations and standards a little bit more on the regulations, but just to define it, regulations are those things that the government says that you have to do. And if you don't do it, you can be put in jail, or you could be levied fines or other types of judgments. Now, standards, they're voluntary. NIST is not a regulation. And when we, and I hear quite a bit, well, I'm compliant with NIST. No, you're not compliant with NIST. NIST is not a regulation. It's a voluntary standard. It's a group of individuals coming together to say, we think these are the best things that the industry should do. Now, the one kind of caveat in that is standards can become mandatory through contracts. PCI, the payment card industry standard, is enforced through contracts. So the credit card companies say, you will do these things to be able to do business with us. Now, this is a tool that organizations can use when they are working with third-party vendors to ensure security. Say, I want you to implement these standards, and thus it through the legal contract process, then they become enforceable. This is just a small sampling of the regulations that are out there, from the U.S. standpoint, as well as more with the GDPR from a Europe standpoint. But each country has their own set of regulations that companies have to follow from a cybersecurity standpoint. And if you're doing business internationally, you have to be cognizant of those regulations. And I also have some individual state regulations here, CCPA and the Ohio Data Protection Act. More states are passing GDPR-like type of regulations. Not seeing a whole lot of necessarily cybersecurity regulations. A lot of it's focused on privacy, which I think is missing a little bit of the boat. I think privacy and security are two different sides of the same coin, but that's a topic for another day. Now, standards, PCI DSS, NIST has a bunch of them out there, DISA, SANS Top 20, IEEE. These are all either nonprofit organizations, or in this standpoint, they're organizations within the government, or INSA as well. But usually these groups of people are from academia, industry, government, coming together and saying, what do we want to say these, the way we want industry to, or organizations within our industry to do. And again, completely voluntary. But they do provide some good baseline activities and things that organizations should be doing to be secure. Pardon me 1 second. I'm going to take a quick drink. So now that we've covered quite a bit of material already with why it's important, down to the things that organizations are mandated to do through regulation, or even the things that they can do voluntarily through standards, let's get into a little bit more of the risk management frameworks. And some of these are voluntary as well. None of the ones that I have in here are enforced by any organization, at least that I'm aware of. And just as there are standards on cybersecurity frameworks, there are a number of risk management frameworks. FAIR is one of the ones, and we'll talk about it a little bit more here in a couple slides. NIST 853 Rev 4, and I believe Rev 5 is in draft mode. ISO, COBIT. I mean, these are just some that are out there. Now, I will mention on like ISO and COBIT generally cost a lot of money. I think just to even bring in ISO to do like the 27001, it's like 50,000. I mean, or more. I mean, they do cost to be certified, whereas NIST is, there's no cost to it. It's just, or whatever the cost to be to implement those things. So I did want to point that out. Same thing, COBIT with ISACA. So just an example here of what the FAIR risk framework is, and kind of that cycle of activities and different attributes within the framework, and what organizations can do to help build up and quantify risk and the things and their approach that they want to do. A little bit of a newer framework. I want to say less than 5 or so years. I may be off a little bit by a couple years, but it's a relatively new framework. I was first introduced into this framework when I was at Ernst & Young as a consultant. To me, a little bit more actionable. It's less heavy of a lift than, say, NIST 853. Again, I love NIST. They do a lot of good work. But one of the complaints, and it's just not a complaint for me, it's others out there, is they're very detailed, very heavy. And again, the wording, even going through a lot of this, the special publications are very verbose. And if you want to get a good night's sleep, it never hurts to pick up one of their special publications. And I love it. I've read a number of them, but it does take a little bit of time to get through. So when we talk about NIST, this is just kind of a graphic that I put together based on their framework. Their black and white image just wasn't cutting it for me for presentation purposes. But this is basically kind of the process that you go through. And the thing to note, even with the FAIR process, and I think what makes both the NIST and FAIR some of the better ones, in my opinion, is that it is a continual process. You're not just one and done. It's an ongoing effort throughout the year or over the years. Just a little bit of a breakdown of what each of those steps are. I'm not going to read these things verbatim. I will make the slides available if you do want them. Again, just the last few bits of the framework. So now, and this is, I think, one of the things I kind of debated about whether to include in this particular presentation or not, because again, when I initially developed this slide, it was more for those within industry that aren't currently doing cyber risk management. But I think there's still some things here to take away, depending on what you are wanting to do once you graduate and you finish your program. I think they're keeping these in mind, no matter what you are going to do. I think are still very important aspects to have and think about, and as you're conversing with other folks within the cyber organization that you may work for, just helpful to have. First and foremost, in any program or project that you're building, having executive buy-in is important. If they do not feel that the effort, the time and resources are worthy and going to improve the organization or going to advance the mission of the organization, it's not going to happen. Plain and simple. Now, some of this conversation will be had by a CISO or other senior management with the executive leadership folks, but it's still important. If you're coming into maybe entry level positions or maybe not so entry level positions, that you're thinking the way that the CISO's thinking, so they can take that and arm themselves with the conversation that they're going to have with the leadership team. Strategically, everything that the security team or cybersecurity department within an organization needs to line up with the enterprise business strategy. and I want to stress this again, is that as cybersecurity professionals within an organization, we are there to support the organization, that business. We need to align our activities with what the business is doing. If we are going against what the organization is doing, we're not going to be successful. It is imperative, no matter what, if you're doing blue team, red team, doesn't matter what part of cybersecurity you're going into, we need to align and be advancing the mission of the organization. And we also need to be good stewards, and we need to be good partners with the other folks within our company, with the other verticals. Having these siloed approaches does no good. We need to be good partners within these organizations. A little bit of my soapbox moment there. When you get buy-in from the other parts of the organization and we're helping them solve their problems, it's amazing what can get done when we're not bickering and infighting and actually working together within the organization. Things get done quickly. But when we're solving these problems, we, as cybersecurity professionals, we need to understand the organization's maturity, the culture, financial health. We also need to understand the external factors like market conditions, and again, the laws and regulations. All of that, we may not be the best to understand, but if we work with others within the business that can help us understand better and make us better in the solutions that we're providing, again, goes a long, long way to making the business more secure. Other considerations when we're talking about building a risk management program or other program, it doesn't matter. Communication is important. If you're not talking with other people, if you're not letting them know what's going on, successes, failures, everything in between, that in itself is a risk. But we have to be able to communicate these things. You know, if you're working in a security awareness type of capacity, being able to work with HR and crafting education or trainings based on the real risk that you are seeing in your jobs is important. You know, yeah, we get phishing, you know, we all understand social engineering, but wouldn't it be more impactful if you can take actual use cases that you're seeing and communicate that to the throughout the organization? I think that's a lot more powerful. And I think, at least in my opinion, I feel that through this risk management process, we can help identify those things. Again, roles and responsibilities. I think understanding the different parts of the organization can help you craft how you talk to somebody and how you communicate it to them so they understand it better. The governance risk compliance software, I think, it's another thing. A lot of these, there's Archer by RSA. There's a number of other GRC platforms that can help kind of be the central point for managing these risks and all the things that go along with risk management. Supply chain risk management is important. Dealing with your logistics folks and understanding or whoever's owning the relationships with the vendors and very, very important. You look at Target and some other breaches where it came in through a third party. Other things like that are something that are important to consider when building this type of program. So I cannot stress enough this process is not linear. It's not point A to point B. And once you get to B, you're done. It is cyclical. It's always going. And this process you may iterate through multiple times within a year or a month or even a day. But again, as you look at, to me, whatever risk management framework, if it's not cyclical, it's not a good program, at least in my opinion. But again, the heart of that, as I mentioned, communicating the things that you're seeing throughout each step of that phase or program is important. Now, this may not be necessarily something that would relate to the purposes of this class, but I mean, when you're talking about, even working with the red team, understanding when do I need to start coordinating my pen test or my vulnerability scans? When do I need to start, based on the findings, start patch management or mitigating those things that we find? So, though not necessarily something that you all may find particularly important, but as you're working through, when should I be doing some of these activities, whether it's, again, pen test, vulnerability scan, implementing into projects, all that good stuff. So this is just kind of a breakdown of things that an organization could do throughout the quarter, again, as they're doing this, spreading that work out so it's happening throughout the year and not just ramping up, that one point in time in the year when a risk assessment's due because of whatever reason. There's a lot of work that happens to ramp up real quick. And then one of the things that happens is there's a huge drop off and things don't tend to get done. Now, and the mitigation and the follow up tend not to happen. And looking at OCR and what they find for, it's not typically the fact that an organization got breached. It's the fact that they didn't follow through. They didn't create what is called a risk management plan, which is just basically a project plan to how they're going to remediate or mitigate the threats that they found or the risks that they found, and then following up. That's what they hammer organizations for, is not doing the follow through. And that's probably one of the reasons I think if a framework isn't that cyclical process is part of my reasoning why I don't think it's a good framework, if it's just that linear versus the cyclical. But anyway, frame and scope, just some, again, other activities that could be doing the risk assessment. And again, it could happen at any point during the year. Then just starting the planning process all over towards the end of the year. Some other things to think about, strategic alignment mentioned already. And this goes for any project. Again, you want to have SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. You want to be able to understand what are indicators of success, those KPIs and those metrics. And there's for some of you data geeks out there, which I'm one of, some of the things that you can consider, reduction in the number of security incidents, number of new unmitigated risk, time to remediate, or mean time to remediate. There's a number of different metrics that are out there that could be an indicator of success. And that's going to depend on a case-by-case basis, whatever the organization really deems of what that indications are. But you want to know what success looks like and be able to measure as you're doing these things. So I think I have a couple more minutes left. So case study number 2, very interesting. This goes back to, I think, 2011. This security guard at a Texas hospital sets up a botnet on this hospital's network to attack a rival hacker gang. Like, when I first saw this, I'm like, really? Why is a security guard um, in a hacker collective or a hacker gang? There's some failures there. But then there's some other failures along the way that I do believe, if we were talking risk management, separation of duties, least privileges, some basic things probably would have kept this from happening. And because it's Texas, it was the summertime, it's a hospital, a lot of things could have gone wrong with this. The guy ended up pleading guilty, mainly because of the video that he posted and took care of himself, or took of himself as he's doing these things. I'm going to try to jump out here real quick and play this video. But I want you to look at some of the things from a risk management standpoint of, had a risk management program been in place, what would you have caught, either through technical controls or through policies or procedures? So, of course, he's a hacker. He's got to be in a hoodie. So I don't know if you guys can hear that, but he's talking about his what he's doing. He's dropping a botnet on a computer. He's got it on a thumb drive. So at that point, so you could see that he had his security badge. He swipes up to some random floor within the hospital, and you see that he's at a computer. I mean, why is a security guard able to log in on a computer and install this program or whatever he used to install the botnet? Again, I mentioned least privileges. I mean, he's a security guard. Yeah, he's going to have access to the floors. I mean, just give him the benefit of the doubt there. But the fact that he's got login credentials that most likely have some sort of advanced privileges. It may not be full admin privileges, but enough, super user, probably at minimum, to install this type of application. Well, making some assumptions here, do they have a antivirus, or at that point, EDR really, endpoint detection and response, really wasn't a thing yet. But at least, did they have antivirus? What other controls in place did they not have? Because I mean, obviously he was able to install it. I don't know if anybody wants to chime in on some other things that they think a risk management program would have caught to keep this from happening.
I personally think if the hospital set up a reasonable multi-level security or have a reasonable RBAC, I think this would not happen at all. And I'm not sure if this is a part of the risk management as well, but I assume like as an organization, if you enforce certain like security policy, you definitely should have a clear definition of what or who can do what, right? So I think there's definitely something messed up.
No, I mean, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the going through, and even from an HR standpoint, did they do a security or background check on this guy um, to see who his friends are, reference checks? I mean, being in a hacker collective, you know, typically, there's some good people in it that, in some white hat hacker collectives, but I mean, there's some things there, red flags to me, that even just doing some non-technical controls would have probably saved this company or this hospital from being able to be victim of this type of attack. And this is a pure example of an insider threat. So, that's one of the things. I mean, I'm a technical guy, but some of these controls don't have to be super technical. But when the policies fell, those technical controls, like an EDR or least privilege, on an AD or access, identity access management, say, okay, this guy's a security guard. Here's where he can log on to, maybe one machine or a couple machines based on, classification, but not some random person's computer somewhere in the hospital. So, yeah, it's, again, I mentioned that broken glass type of mentality. Once you start looking through this with a risk management or risk based um, lens, the world does change quite a bit. Um, so let me get back to here. I've got the link to the video if you want to watch it all the way through, but just kind of a recap of what happened as far as what the impact and outcome was. Again, HVAC unit. I mean, just think of the potential impact to human life had something gone wrong. Somebody else exploited the vulnerability that he set up. Not only patient lives were at risk, the medication that's needed to be temperature controlled, the specimens. I mean, there's just a lot of bad stuff that could have happened as a result of this insider threat. So yeah, I think that puts me right at the hour. Any questions? Any comments?
You had mentioned that there was a new possible vision for NIST. What is the new direction they're taking in that new revision 5 that's in production?
Yeah, it's incorporating the new privacy framework. So the NIST privacy framework 1.0, I believe, came out towards the end of last year. And with that, it aligns to the NIST cybersecurity framework as far as some of the verbiage and even how CSF has the 5 different functions. There are 5 similar functions within the privacy framework. And it's been a minute since I've looked at the draft version, but I do believe that revision 5 incorporates the privacy piece into 1.0 or Rev 4. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good question. Any other questions?
Hi, Nick. Awesome talk. And you mentioned a couple of different frameworks from different organizations, like one of them is NIST. So I wonder, as a organization, which framework should I choose? Or maybe another way to ask this question is, as a company, we probably have some compliance thing to do.
Yeah.
One way to do that is I look at whatever compliance I need to fulfill and I pick up one framework. The other way would be, I pick up some framework which might not satisfy some compliance at all. So you see, like there's a conflict between an ideal framework and some compliance you want to achieve.
Yeah. So and again, I'm not necessarily advocating or recommending one. I think it is an organizational decision what they do choose. NIST, one of the good things about NIST is they have mapped a lot of that, the risk management framework to the CSF, to the different regulatory requirements, HIPAA being probably the biggest one. There's also a tool that I did not mention in here called the Secure Control Framework. It's an open sourced organization that actually maps out almost all of the regulatory and other frameworks. I mean, they have done a lot of good work. They also, from a risk assessment standpoint, ask some questions, risk-based questions or assessment-based questions that then align to the different frameworks. The only one that isn't there is high trust because it's proprietary. But so that's another tool organizations could potentially use. Again, it's open source. It's a collaborative process, and there are a lot of folks from industry involved in that. But it really, to go back to the other part of your question, the compliance piece is definitely something they have to think about. And in choosing a framework, again, not to reinvent the wheel, but if there is something that's already out there that's mapped to that, whether it's SOX or GLBA or HIPAA, if there's something that's already out there, they may want to look at that first and then decide, okay, do we want to start from scratch or utilize what somebody else has done? Now, the thing I will say is not doing anything is not an excuse. Like at some point, you have to make a decision and go down a path. And through the good thing is if they're doing that iterative process and continual cycle, then they can say, have we gone down the right path? If not, okay, where can we adjust to make sure we're going down the path that we need to be going down? But not doing anything, in my opinion, isn't acceptable. And if they're under a regulatory scrutiny like HIPAA, not doing anything will get them in trouble with OCR. The one thing within HIPAA, you don't have to go full, throw every single available resource or dollar at a cybersecurity program. It's reasonable to what that organization is, from size to they take all of that into consideration. So, a single practice office doesn't have to throw the same controls that an IU Health or a large healthcare system would need to put in. So they do allow some leeway based on size of the organization. So, but the one thing is you've got to do something. You just cannot do it. There's actually a single practice provider just a couple weeks ago that came out that was hit with a substantial fine from OCR because they weren't doing risk management.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? All right, let's thank Nick again.
Thank you very much for having me.
Awesome. I think WebEx is working well.
Yeah, it was a good experience. Apologize for the background. That is the time we live in, I guess, with all of this work from home.
All right.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Jerry. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you
Thank you,
doing
Nick.
this.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
See ya.